to dress the part, don't I?
Yeah, I suppose.
Step one is dress the part, helps to make it look like you're at least, trying to make it,
Yeah.
fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yep. That's why I don't trust the part. I'm not even trying to fake it.
Well, if nothing else, we're learning about all the the atrocious evils of, the rulership of Rome.
Yeah. You back home for the weekend?
Yeah. Yeah, I came back to watch their tournament and just get a break.
When do you head back?
I'm thinking Tuesday. It's a little early. I won't know until Tuesday night if I have work or not.
Yeah.
But
Are you gonna say hi to Paul?
be stuff there. I'm not. Hi.
No, let's go say hi to Paul. Okay. Hi, Uncle Paul.
Hello. What are those?
Sibby, you say hi?
Hi. Hi.
What's in your pocket? Sibby, what's in your pocket?
She does not like dudes.
Yeah, I noticed that. Well, David's okay. She can tolerate David.
'Cause he's a goof.
True.
Kids like goofballs.
So does that mean that the doctors is good?
Does she like the doctor?
Yeah, your dad.
Oh, yeah. No, dads are different. Dads are dads. Although I'm sure, when Jeff is home and the facade is off, he's a goofball. The doctor facade.
Yeah, we're watching her. Well, I was watching her yesterday all day, and I told her to say good morning to Paul, and she just looked at him. And it's like, I'm like, he didn't even do nothing.
It's just my presence alone.
Justin, do you have Monday off?
No, what's Monday?
Mom, what are you gonna get with you? That's exactly the one I told you.
Huh? Oh. I don't think we get the. I should probably look though.
He's not employed by the federal government and the state government.
What's he doing?
Yeah. Nope.
Probably counts as lucky stars, I guess,
Hi, my
like
darling.
Christmas and Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we typically, they'll, limit our vacation on, days like that, so we get a good, long vacation for Christmas and New Year's. But, it's holidays like that where our customers usually don't work, so it's an opportunity for us to get in and do maintenance or whatever. I was reading, well, I'll wait till I get some. I wanna do some more looking into it. Corey, have you been at least making the haul?
Am I working?
Yeah,
Yeah, we're getting our pounds.
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not without its struggle though. Seriously considering a career change.
Yeah. I mean, you can't dive forever.
I know.
Sooner you, start on something else,
I think so.
the better.
I'm just saying, like, off the water altogether.
Yeah.
See a
Would
lot
you
of-
still keep your boats though and
I don't know how I could.
use that as a source of income? Is it a source of income or is it more of a
Not,
burden?
not without me on it.
Yeah.
You just haven't found a good captain to take over for you. Or several captains. Then
Yeah.
you'd be the admiral of your fleet.
Yeah, but it'd almost be nice to just walk away from it.
All right. All right, good morning. Let's open up in prayer this morning. Father God, thank you for this body. I ask that you would give us an attitude of worship and praise. We would set aside our worries and concerns of the world, focus on you, and ask that you would be with those who are absent and traveling. Help us to do your will. And be with the speakers today, that they could speak truth. In your son's name we pray, amen.
Justin, I don't have any input
Yeah, I
here.
haven't turned on yet.
Okay, thank you.
How's that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, a quick recap. So last weekend we covered Elagabalus, who took on the office of emperor at the age of 14. So he was a Syrian Arab, and half African. So his mother was, does anybody remember his mother's name? Yeah, Julia Misa. So she had aspirations to control the empire from the shadows, and so she tried to control her son grandson Elagabalus, and Elagabalus was what we would consider what would you call him? Transsexual. So is that right? Transsexual? Transgender, yeah. So he preferred any and all people. He cross-dressed, and so he was made emperor prior to entering into Rome, and so the Romans weren't really prepared for what was coming from their ruler. So he enters Rome, wearing eyeshadow, dressed. It was common garb for the Persians, but this is not common for the Romans, the Italians, and their leaders. So more and more we see the leadership or the office of emperor being seated by those who are not of Roman descent.
I have a question. So, regarding the fall of Rome was internal, and it was because was it because of this that moral standards lowered?
No. So we'll get into it, but just briefly mention it. A lot of it was due to I remember for an emperor to succeed, he would either have to, the Praetorian Guard had a lot of power at this point, and so in order for an emperor to remain in power, he typically had to fund, the expectations of the Praetorian Guard, which meant he had to tax heavily the citizens of Rome. So you couldn't satisfy both the people of Rome and the Praetorian Guard. So there's emperors that tried to, that are, as we'll get into, that are from the Senate that, were more focused on the people of Rome and not the Praetorian Guard. Praetorian Guard didn't, their pay would be reduced, so then they would kill the emperor, so then the next emperor would come and they would support the Praetorian Guard, but then, the people of Rome would hate them, and, then the Senate would seek out an assassination plot, so it was not a win, it was a lose-lose situation. So ultimately there's the civil wars between the people of Rome and the legions. The Praetorian Guard is what kind of starts Rome down its descent. But a lot of that is also because of, Rome, what it meant to be Roman was losing meaning at this point. It was becoming very diversified. I mean, the last 3 emperors are, either of Arab or African nationality. So yeah, so Elagabalus, so he's ruling over Rome. He really despises the Senate. His father taught him that, the way to stay in power is to not trust anybody but yourself and the legions. So he funded heavily the legions, so he overtaxed the people. And eventually his grandmother, Julia Misa, realized that she wasn't going to be able to control Elagabalus, so she set her sights on her other grandson, Alexander. And so by this point, the Praetorian Guard's view of Elagabalus had diminished a lot. So, they saw his, odd conduct with people and his sexual preferences, and so on hints of revolt and assassination, Elagabalus decided that he couldn't trust the Praetorian Guard anymore. Especially since Julia Misa started kind of whispering in the legion's ears of Alexander and what he could do for them, and so they started supporting Alexander. And so Julia Misa convinced Elagabalus to name Alexander her, basically the next emperor upon Elagabalus' death. And so upon hearing that, the Praetorian Guard or the legions hoisted Alexander on their shields, and so obviously Elagabalus didn't take that well, and so he faked Alexander's death, and then the Praetorian Guard went into a frenzy, and they demanded that he produce Alexander, and Alexander said, Elagabalus returned Alexander, but he said, Alexander will never become emperor, and obviously that didn't go over well with the guard. So they pursued Elagabalus, and they ended up killing both him and his mother, not Julia Misa. I don't remember his mother's name. Not that it's of great importance.
So was Alexander's mother the same as Elagabalus?
No. So two different, they were two different daughters of Julia Misa. So Elagabalus and his mother were killed and dragged through the streets of Rome. So then Alexander is made emperor. So Alexander is also very young upon taking office. He has no experience. And also under Elagabalus, if you remember, he worshipped the sun god Elagabal. So he instituted the worship of Elagabal within Rome, converted all of their temples from Jupiter, worship of Jupiter, to worship of Elagabal. In reference to Christians, he, being a Syrian, who were usually a little more accepting of Christians, a lot of Christians actually fled to the Assyrian, what would become the Sassanids, would flee to their territory because they were still allowed to worship their god. So Elagabalus, even though he forced the worship of Elagabal, it was primarily due to that enforcing was hoisted upon people like the Senate, people within power, who Elagabalus despised. So, and interesting enough, I was reading last night that the object of worship was a black stone. So I wanted to kind of go into a rabbit hole and see, because there's another religion that worships a black stone. So I wanted to see if there was any correlation to that. So
It was probably a meteorite.
yeah, it's speculation, but so, and then that's kind of where our date for Christmas stemmed from, given that the worship of Elagabal was dedicated to December 25th. So Alexander takes the throne at the age of 13, but his mother, Julia Mamaea, who is the daughter of Julian Misa, she basically holds the reign of Rome. But she is a lot more wise than Elagabal's mother. So she goes through Rome and handpicks, senators that are not corrupt, have some sense of morality, and then she forces Alexander to sit in on their court sessions. Anytime the Senate would meet, she would have Alexander sit on it to gain experience. So the relationship between the Senate and the office of emperor grew under Alexander because he sought their wisdom and support through Julia Mamaea. So Julia Mamaea slash Alexander bring on a couple individuals, Ulpian, who his mission was basically to balance the books, get Rome back into the return to some sense of economic stability, given that the last couple emperors had basically diminished their treasury, and obviously this meant cutting the Praetorian Guard's pay, and so that didn't go over well. So Ulpian was eventually killed by the Praetorian Guard. And also during Alexander's reign, the Parthian Empire falls. So Parthian Empire, for a few hundred years had been kind of the primary opposing force to Rome in the east. And so it falls to a royal family that came out of the came out of the house of what was called Sasan, hence the rise of the Sassanid Empire. So the Sassanid Empire becomes basically the primary opposition to Rome for the next 400 years. And so they viewed the old Persian Empire as their territory, so they started going against Rome to gain back the territory. So Alexander, enters into talks with their first king is Artashar. So he wants to enter into peace talks with Artashar, but Artashar is not interested. And then obviously Rome, the Praetorian Guard views this as dishonorable to try to negotiate with another empire. So their opinions of Alexander start, waning, and along with their, pay cut. And so eventually, as Alexander's in the east, trying to negotiate peace and fails, so they enter into a war with the Sassanid army, and Alexander sends basically splits his legions into three, sends one north, sends one south, and then his legion that he was overseeing would hit them head on from the west. So, but what ends up happening is he thinks that the legions in the north and south are easily overrunning the Sassanids, so he decides not to advance. But what really happens is both the northern and southern legions are defeated. So the legions with Alexander are furious because they have to sit back and watch their brothers die. So again, his popularity amongst the legions is severely suffering. So then at the same time, or roughly a year later, the Germanic tribes take this opportunity in the north to start revolting against Rome. And so Alexander takes his army to meet them in the north. And again, Julia Mamaea convinces Alexander to seek peace with them and offer them gold. And so the Praetorian Guard, sees this as, hey, you gave us a pay cut, and now you're offering another enemy gold for peace. So, so that same year, when they arrived north to confront the Germanic tribes, they were assassinated by the legion. So that's when we enter in the year of the 6 emperors. So up until this point, the power of Roman prestige. So the power of the Roman prestige began to come into question after the assassination of Severus Alexander. So at this point, Rome should have fallen because it marked the end of the climax of the empire, and internal division, external invasions, and economic catastrophes began increasing to a point where it was too much to bear. So at this point, the Roman Empire had dominated the world for at least 400 years. So this starts basically the downfall of Rome. But instead of the empire ending right then and there, the empire changed. So enter in this individual, Gaius Julius Verus Maximus Thrax, or Maximinius. So he was proclaimed emperor after the assassination of Alexander. He was a Roman peasant general who had risen through the ranks and was very popular amongst the legions and the Praetorian Guard. He was of Thracian descent, which was a region at the northeast corner of Greece, or southeast corner of modern-day Bulgaria. So Maximus focused, in relation to Christians, he focused his persecution not on, the Christian movement. Well, the Christian movement, but not persecuting Christians individually. He was smart and began persecuting positions of authority within the churches. So he pointed his focus on bishops and presbyters, where they would either be exiled or executed. So this was really the first systematic attack on the Christian hierarchy that had been established. So another one of his first order of businesses was to double the pay of the soldiers to ensure the loyalty of the army. But it would be a decision that would come back to haunt him, because he would be forced to send out violent agents across the empire to drum up the necessary revenue in the form of tax collection. So, going back to this increasing division between Rome's armies and the citizens of Rome. He then immediately relaunches the campaign against the Germans that Alexander was reluctant to carry out, and the Germans left the front lines in the winter of 235 expecting a large sum of money from Alexander, and found themselves in the spring facing off against a large Roman army led by a very well-seasoned general, or emperor at this point. So when he took...
He was a general before.
Yeah. So when he took the throne, he looks like it, right? Look at that square chin. It's a bad dude. So when he took the throne, Maximinius had to keep watch over the officer corps and the Senate, as they were Alexander loyalists. And he had to thwart 2 assassination attempts almost immediately that were organized by the Senate. So naturally, this, coupled with his hatred of the upper classes, given that he was a peasant, made him paranoid, and he began down the road of Purge City. So from his camps in Germany, he started noting down suspect senators, equians and military officers who he thought would attempt some kind of revenge plot, and one by one they were either fired, exiled, or executed. So ultimately, a large percentage of the upper class and Senate were reduced to poverty, and the wealth was transferred over to Maximinius' soldiers. So Maximinius was able to push the Germans back across the border and bring them to their knees. Once he did that, he headed back to Pannonia, which is modern-day Hungary, but he would never set foot in Rome, but would rule from Rome's frontiers. So he openly disdained the capital and everything it stood for. So portions of the army became similar to a spy network. So throughout the empire, they would monitor Roman governors of each province and report any suspicious activities back to Maximinius. And if deemed so, he would have the governors either fired or executed. The general population came to hate Maximinius because of his aggressive tax policies, and the elites hated him for constantly picking them off. All this would lead to a powder keg that would light off in 238. The spark that lit the keg came from the province of in Africa, which was made up of rich landowners, middle-class businessmen, and poor laborers. They had all finally had enough, and so the landowners eventually armed themselves and the workers and marched to the city and killed all the officials. This led to the whole province in Africa entering into a revolt against Rome, against the emperor. So the people then marched to the doorstep of the proconsul of Africa, which is, essentially the governor of, that entire region. And this individual's name was Gordian I, and the people demanded that he take up the position of Emperor of Rome. So in 238, Gordian I, also named Marcus Antonius Gordianus Sempronius Romanus, started leading a revolution against Maximinius. The Senate then ratified his position and declared Maximinius the public enemy of Rome. So almost immediately after the Senate ratified Gordian's position of emperor, the local legion in Africa marched on the revolt in Carthage, which is on the northern coast of modern-day Tunisia. And Gordian's son, Gordian II, rode out in front to lead the militia, but was promptly defeated and killed. So once Gordian I heard of his son's death, he committed suicide. So Gordian I ruled for a whole 22 days. So with Maximinius still leading the legions, the Senate had to choose a replacement for Gordian or offer apologies to Maximinius. So determining that Maximinius would have no mercy, they decided to continue the revolt and decided on 2 men of the Senate to take the throne. So they pick Pupienus, old Poopy Pants, and Balbinus. So Pupienus was a lifelong soldier, and Balbinus was a lawyer and poet, and both were loyal to the Senate. Pupienus would make his way out to spearhead the military defense of Italy, and Balbinus would remain back in Rome to take care of the administrative duties of the office of emperor. So the Senate announced their decision to the people of Rome, but it was met with boos, flying objects, and ultimately the people rejected their decision. The people loved the Gordian family, and a lot of this was primarily due to the games that Gordian I had set up for the people while he was proconsul. And so the only way that the people of Rome would accept the legitimacy of these other 2 emperors was if they also included Gordian III as co-emperor. And so Gordian III was named co-emperor in 238. He was the nephew of Gordian I. So he was the 6th emperor in the year of the 6 emperors. So in 238, Maximinus eventually leads his troops south through the Alps to march on Rome. And he was going to cut a swath through Italy on his way to Rome. And when he got to Rome, he was going to kill every senator he could find within Rome.
That's Marcus?
Maximinus, the general. So
The
he still exists. So the Senate, he's still up north in the region of modern day Hungary. He's still got the devotion of the legions. Oh, sorry. He's still got the devotion of the legions. So he's still technically ruling, the frontier regions of Rome. But so within Rome, they, first, the citizens demand Gordian I to take the office of emperor. So he comes out of Africa. But the legions squash that. So he's emperor for 22 days. Maximinus is still up north. And then the Senate within Rome names these 3 individuals emperor in place of Maximinus. So
two of their choice and then one of the people's
Yeah.
choice.
Yep.
So that the bottom one looks young.
Mhm. Yeah, he's young. So he was born in 225. He takes office in 238. So he is 13 years old. Yeah. So Maximinus marches south with the goal to enter into Rome and kill off the entire Senate. So along his way, he tries to set siege to this town Aquileia, which is a walled city in northern Italy. But the people of that city were prepared to make a stand. So Maximinus tries to set siege to the city, but the city was well fortified, and the people of Aquileia were able to hold off Maximinus. This became a point of fury of Maximinus, and so he started taking out his fury on his own troops. So he would order executions for the slightest infractions of his troops. And so, suffering from a lack of supplies, exhaustion, and harsh discipline, the legions started questioning their loyalty to Maximinus. So eventually these doubts turned to murderous intent, and eventually a group of officers entered Maximinus' tent and killed both him and his son, and posted his head on a spike in front of the gates of Aquileia as a signal that the siege was over. So Maximinus was 65 years old and had ruled over the empire for just over 3 years.
I've heard stories about like some emperors being on a stake. Is that just that guy, or is that?
That was pretty common.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd either have their bodies, some of them had their bodies dragged through the streets, some of them were beheaded and had their heads put on spikes. So Maximinus' single-minded support for the legions was at the expense of every other citizen. This got the ball rolling for the crisis of the 3rd century, so where the legions would oftentimes go against the citizens of Rome, but when they were defeated, they would ask for mercy, they would receive it, then at the next chance for gold, they would return to their efforts of sieging the citizens. Rinse, wash, repeat. So this cycle goes on as Rome keeps descending into a civil war. So upon the assassination of Maximinus, Pupienus commanded the northern legions back to the borders of Germanicus and then he returns to Rome. But back in Rome, Balbinus was over his head with administrative duties of the office. So there were official positions that were left unfilled and social programs left deserted. So eventually riots began to break out in Rome, and Rome became a mess. So Pupianus returned back to a Rome that was in turmoil, and so he blames it on Balbinus. So adding to the chaos, a fire breaks out in Rome. The citizens blame the emperors, and the emperors blame each other until they eventually become like Bassianus and Geta. Remember the brothers? Brothers that co-empered. So they split the palace in two, and they hardly speak to each other. And then to add to the infighting, the Praetorian Guard still viewed themselves as the center of the universe, and everyone else revolved around them. And Balbinus and Pupianus actively tried to prove the Guard wrong. So the Praetorian Guard was cut out of the loop in any of the decisions made. Their bonuses were ignored, and their egos were stomped on. So eventually they decided to remind everyone who again was at the center of the universe. So on July 29th, one of the prefects led a group of the Praetorian Guard to the palace, and they planned to reassert the authority of the Praetorian Guard. But both emperors assumed that it was the other emperor that had instigated the attack on the other. Had they been both united in their efforts, they could have thwarted the assault, but divided within the hour, they were both killed, and so they had both ruled for 99 days. So the Praetorian Guard thought, before the Praetorian Guard would kill the emperor, but didn't really pay any mind to what would happen after, who would become emperor. So this time around, they put some thought into it. So they thought as long as they left Gordian III untouched, given that he was the people's favorite, while removing the other two emperors, that they could come out unscathed. So they make a big, to-do about Gordian III. They shower him with praises, and so he becomes the sole emperor. So similar to Alexander, young Gordian found himself declared emperor before he had any experience as a young boy. And so it fell on his mother, Gordiana, who is the daughter of Gordian I, to navigate the throne. So she manages to satisfy the Senate by allowing them power and authority, and also quells the Praetorian Guard by offering a satisfactory salary. So Gordian ended the active, intense in relation to the Christians, Gordian ended the active, intense persecution of the Christian movement and its hierarchy by Maximinus, and Christianity was tolerated during Gordian's reign, and would actually go through a period where Christianity would grow exponentially, within the territory of Rome. Some of the debates within the movement, given that they, the requirements for them to worship the emperor, and their persecution was laxed, or almost entirely removed at this point. They started debating what actually a church was. So a lot of bishops were of the idea that a church required a building. So they started leading efforts to acquire buildings to hold church in. Whereas there are other thoughts that the church was the people, they didn't need buildings, and so they continued meeting in homes and catacombs and what have you. So this is kind of the point in history where the building structure of a church becomes significant. Some of the other debates, actually, we're not there yet. So when we get to Diocletia, we start getting into a a big separation, which will involve the Novatians and the Donatists, which is coming up here. So,
what, at this point then, the general persecution of the Christians is coming to an end then?
yep,
Because that would be the only reason why they would all of a sudden be like, hey, let's,
right,
buy some property, build a building,
yeah.
and let everyone know that, hey, we're here in
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, and it becomes more laxed with the next emperor, who will be an Arab, because they're Arabs and Persians were, as I said, a lot more accepting of Christianity. So, the Sasanian king Ardashir, if you remember him, the first king of the Sassanid Empire. So he renews during Gordian III's reign. Ardashir renews his ambition to take back the territory of the Persian Empire. So in 240 AD, he elevates his son Shapur, who would become the notorious enemy of Rome, as co-reign or co-regent. So in 240 and 241, they lead their forces in a series of invasions that will win back the portion of the Persian territory, and they start pushing into Syria. So they're significantly advancing their territory. So shortly after Rome's victory in 243, in 242, Rome leads a force in response to Syria. And so they were able to utterly destroy the Sassanids, but Shapur uses this as a learning experience. So he's able to witness how, the Roman legions operate, and takes note. So he would later come back and adjust his tactics accordingly. And then shortly after Rome's victory in 243, Gordian's Praetorian prefect died of disease, and so he names Philip to fill the vacancy. And this would prove to be his worst decision that Gordian ever made. So Philip, also known as Philip the Arab, would become emperor next. So we'll get into that next weekend. Okay? That's all I got. Any questions?